like to start off with a question, which is actually, where's the clicker, which is what I found. Look, but what would it mean to the people in this room to say that you kind of broadly understand the quantum computing landscape and what it means to prepare for this era of commercial quantum advantage that we hear so much about? Well, that's not the button to click. Okay, well, we'll get there in the end. So, look, there's no fixed answer to this in reality, and my objective with you really is the fact that over the past year or two, I've been trying to find out, and I've been interviewing kind of some of the world's leading experts, from academics to business leaders to the CEOs of quantum computing companies themselves, end users, and I really want to share some of the learnings I found on that journey with yourselves, so hopefully you have a better idea yourself. But before I get going, by means of a quick introduction, I work at Citi Global Insights, which you can kind of think as sitting in between your traditional research that a bank provides with buy and sell recommendations and kind of the more public-facing goods. Interestingly, though, every single report I've done, including the report that this deck is based upon, that I will share at the end, is all public-facing. So you can think of Citi Global Insights as Citi's thought leadership division, and my focus really is innovation in technology. I look at 100 different areas of innovation, from AI to space, which is funny enough where my background is. But I think one of the most interesting areas of innovation in recent years is that of quantum computing. So my job really day to day is to synthesize down complex topics into kind of more digestible content, whether that be in presentations, reports, or interviews for our clients and for the public. So I also reckon if you've got into around, 2 o'clock today on the second day of a conference, you probably know what a quantum computer is, so I'm not going to bore you with that. But I'm going to kind of take it from the perspective of, you might be thinking, what do you want to take back to work to show your colleagues or maybe your C-suite executives in terms of practical advice? So on that basis, I'm going to basically go through, I think, 5 key takeaways or perspectives, as I put it, that I found during my research. And again, this will be in far more detail in the report I'll share at the end, which is a full 150 pages. And then I'll try and kind of pull that all together by sharing kind of the pathway in terms of how to prepare that we put together for that report. First up, government investment. So why is government investment remotely important? Well, because we're still at the early stages of kind of developing the quantum computing ecosystem, and unlike with conventional classical computing, where you're kind of at that stage where you can just really be self-propelled by the investment and by the profits the industry is making, we still kind of need to get quantum computers to make or to provide a significant commercial quantum advantage over their conventional or classical counterparts. Obviously, part of the reason that governments are investing so much is because of that strategic significance, not just the fact that a sufficiently large enough quantum computer will be able to break encryption, but also because of the opportunity for value creation and economic growth. For a bit of context, I think spending commitments around nowadays are around like 36 billion globally. It's a little bit out of date, so I think the number's slightly higher, but going up to around 42 billion in the coming years. But I think for me, actually, the more interesting thing is the divide when you look at kind of different countries. So we all know we're in the middle of what is probably an AI arms race, and that could be influencing how countries view quantum technologies in the future. And if you look here quite clearly, you can see there's a significant divide between like the US and Europe and China. Interestingly, China's numbers are very much up for debate. They range from around 4 to 17 billion. However, the other interesting thing is if you really think about it, no one's really going to know the true number. These are just official announced numbers, right? So it's probably a fairly accurate reflection of the fact that a lot of these will be kind of shrouded in secrecy, given that strategic importance. So as well as investing a dollar amount, governments also need to invest in having a sufficiently educated workforce. Well, why is that? Well, because we probably, if you haven't already heard at this stage, there is quite a talent shortage. I mean, I think the numbers that are often quoted is it is around several thousand quantum experts globally, and frankly, every survey you look at, left, right, and center, at some point has a talent shortage being a barrier to growth. The good news is short courses could enable upskilling, and that's something I think governments are actually taking more notice of in recent years and investing more into. But I think if we look at the kind of the brighter side of things, in terms of graduates in quantum technology relevant fields, the numbers are quite high. Obviously, these are skewed towards larger countries, so perhaps looking at it on a per capita basis is a bit better. And you see countries like the UK and the US doing quite well there, as well as, of course, the EU. I think one thing that no chart will ever show, however, is the fact that national security concerns limit access to foreign talent. And This is pretty much the case across, frankly, all countries that I can think of. But if we just take the US, for example, I think there was a not too old, recent, was it White House subcommittee meeting report that kind of pointed out or highlighted how significant foreign talent was to building the US quantum ecosystem. However, also how difficult it was to hire, because a bit like other strategically significant areas like aerospace and defense, there's a lot of hurdles you need to get through. However, why are companies or countries hiring into the workforce? Well, it's because there's a market opportunity, right? That's usually the answer. And one of the things we did in the report was we looked at around 10 or so different estimates for the total addressable market, or TAM for short. And what we found is that on average, back in 2022 at least, the number's a little bit higher this year, you were looking at something at around $650 million in terms of market size, going up to a little over $2 billion. But with a forecast, or with an average forecast, I should say, compound annual growth rate of 30%, which is quite high. I think for more than that, though, a couple of takeaways for me was that the forecasts vary a lot, in fact, vary tenfold, and even the compound growth rates vary between 25 and 50%. And from having looked at a lot of these for different areas of innovation, I can tell you that's not typical. Usually you see quite a tight clustering, if not around kind of at least the sizes and around kind of the forecast growth rates. But I think one thing that I found is no matter how far you go out, no matter how far you look, all of the forecasts kind of assume one constant steady stream of growth, which I will get onto in a moment, but you can probably tell that I have a slightly different view to that. Before I do, however, just to try and put things into context. So I mentioned earlier on that, look, we look at loads of different areas of innovation. I will provide a link to the updated version of this, where you can find this report at the end of the deck. But basically, we looked at 100 different areas of innovation. There's probably around 50 on board, and on the screen, and we compared the market sizes, the amount of VC going in. Back when we initially did this, and one of kind of the instigators of us looking into quantum in a bit more detail was the fact that if you look at the forecast growth, the market size for 2026, and compared it to the then VC investment for the full year of 2022, you find that quantum computing is actually, in fact, one of the most densely invested into areas of innovation. There could be a few different reasons for this. Firstly, you could make the argument that actually VCs that are making the investments suspect or are forecasting a larger market size in 2026 than actually the research houses that produce these research estimates. Another one could be simply the fact that a lot of the VCs are investing for longer time horizons than 2026. Another option is also, if you look to the top near the right, near fintech and SaaS, you'll see AI, which has obviously had quite its inflection point in the past few years. And there could be a strong argument to be made that quantum computing will similarly have its own inflection point. So coming back to my point of market opportunities and how it's not all exactly perfect, if we look at value creation, why do I say value creation? Because it's a bit more of a broader term. I think the first thing to note is that it's really highly likely to be characterized by multiple inflection points. So this is a good chart for illustrative purposes. It's a little bit out of date, but I think the point still stands, which is that rather than having one constant growth rate for the market size of quantum computing, you're actually going to have multiple inflection points characterized by the multiple different areas of commercial quantum advantage. Now, the exact order in which that will happen is very much up for debate, so which is why I do emphasize this is for illustrative purposes only. But generally speaking, there'd be in probably the 4 areas of machine learning, optimization, molecular simulation, or chemistry as it's seen there, and of course cryptography, which actually isn't on that chart. One thing to note, though, actually I think is quite important whenever you're speaking to anyone, is to clarify that actually the nature of commercial quantum advantage will be far, far more granular than that. It'll be actually pretty highly granular, I'd say. What do I mean by that? So one often quoted number is that in the next 15 to 30 years, we'll have $450 to $850 billion in value creation, which is provided by BCG. Look, one of the things I really like about that is the fact that it does split the value creation into those different areas of commercial quantum advantage, and actually it does split it further to looking at specific areas of, for instance, vaccine design or, for instance, catalyst design. But in reality, I think commercial quantum advantage, when it does arrive in certain areas, will be even more granular than that. So what do I mean by that? Whatever area will be first, that's up for debate, but when it does occur, I think it'll be, modeling a very specific molecule that helps particularly maybe develop one particular vaccine, modeling a specific molecule that helps one specific component of discovering a new fertilizer. And similarly with machine learning, right? It's a very big field. It's highly unlikely that all of a sudden quantum computers can help all parts of machine learning. It's probably going to be one specific algorithm at a time. In terms of value creation, I think, I'm pressing the wrong button again. In terms of value creation, it's kind of how do you capitalize on that? I think, at least for corporates, there'll be two things that'll be quite key, and that'll be collaboration and the cloud. I put them together because I think they're quite interlinked, at least in this context. And what I mean by that is collaboration will be needed to bring about sufficient standards. So unlike with conventional computers that all use a standard architecture of a silicon transistor, quantum computers right now have a lot of different quantum, different hardware or qubit modalities, as you can see from the bottom of the figure there. In addition to that, you have this whole layer of error correction, and I'm not going to go into that today because we simply just don't have the time. But the reality is things aren't standardized, they're very complex. And I think the easiest way that I found to kind of explain it to corporates is in the same way that the USB protocol allowed for the seamless switching of peripherals between normal, conventional computers, I think standardization, and the collaboration needed to bring that about will hopefully help in removing that friction, you can say, between using different types of quantum computing hardware, which for corporates will be really quite key in terms of then adopting the technology. And actually, that's kind of what you're seeing already a little bit in terms of the cloud. So you're seeing quantum computing as a service providers, or QCAS providers as short, sitting between kind of the end customer and there's quantum processing unit or QPU providers. And they do provide a number of benefits simply because it means that the users, typically which will probably be corporate users in the future, don't have to worry about the back-end issues that may arise with the technology. Also, of course, the cloud, as always, mitigates a lot of the high infrastructure and maintenance costs. As I'm sure many of you will know, these machines are not cheap as of yet. So it kind of allows you to use it on a as kind of needed basis. And frankly, if there's anything that I've learned over the past decade was to not underestimate the kind of software as a service model. So that probably will play a key part. Obviously, for certain users, they will need a machine themselves for various reasons. But if you're talking kind of generalizing, then this will be quite key. And then, look, if we kind of think about the 5 things that we've spoken about so far and bring it together and talking about how to then prepare for commercial quantum advantage, I would say whenever you're going back to speak to your colleagues, to your C-suite, think about the stage of the process they're in. If you've been at this conference now for a day and a half, you probably have enough awareness of what quantum computers can and can't do. But I would say always double check whenever you're speaking to anyone, because there are, of course, a lot of misconceptions that these technology might be 10 to 15, 20 years away. It's probably nearer 5 to 10, if I'm being conservative, probably hopefully a bit nearer than that. But also, I would always emphasize whenever you speak to anyone, do emphasize what quantum computers can't do as much as what they can do, right? Because whilst we know they'll probably be really good at machine learning, optimization, molecular simulation, and breaking cryptography, you probably want to clarify and at least understand from the person that you're speaking to, and I'm saying this from experience, by the way, that actually quantum computers won't be good at everything, right? They'll be, for instance, pretty terrible at addition, right? And that's where you're going to use hybrid computing, use quantum computers alongside conventional computers. In terms of kind of how to prepare for commercial quantum advantage, I'm going to summarize a lot of things in here, but I go into a lot more detail in the report. But coming back to my point about workforce education, I think the first thing any company or organization should do is look internally and begin to map some of those skills that they have within the organization to see which ones are maybe relevant to putting together some form of working group or allocating a point person. And simply put, that's because speaking to a lot of organizations, they do tend to underestimate how much of an interest certain mathematicians or physicists or people with computing backgrounds have in the topic. And that's always a good starting point, starting internally. Once you've started internally, you can then look at kind of analyzing those opportunities and risks. So coming back to my point about the market opportunity there, you want to start talking to your existing partners. Now, these could be any partners. They could be your cybersecurity partners, your consultants, banks, you name it. Start speaking to them, leverage the relationships you have with them, I would say, to kind of gauge where they think quantum computing could impact your business both positively and negatively. And the reason for that is really to start developing the specific expertise you need to really truly understand how quantum is going to affect your business. And that is particularly relevant because the next step really is to create your own quantum impact statement. Again, I am probably summarizing things, you could argue, a bit too quickly, but you go into a lot more detail in the report. But this is the point at which you're going to looking at specific problems, the materiality of those problems. How much is it going to cost to kind of to employ a quantum computer, how much is it going to save? And frankly, at any point when you start building in costs, you need to start thinking about what is your board going to say. So it would be great to have a high-level board strategy at this point. And then kind of nearing the end, I promise, I know I'm probably overrunning a little bit. So I think the next step is really to identify your quantum partners. You can swap out step 3 and 4, by the way, depending on your kind of comfort level in terms of knowledge. But I think it's really important when you start evaluating your quantum computing partners to think about, you know, not just are they a software, hardware provider, are they full stack, but also think about the biases they have and the knowledges they have. Because frankly, the services you need are going to vary a lot, especially just within the kind of maybe industries with which you operate. And what I mean by that is, you know, you might need some consultancy, you might need somebody to hold your hand, but also when you're thinking about hardware providers, think about the fact that they might not be software agnostics. They might have certain, you know, coding languages they prefer. And then finally, just to finish things off, it's really, at this stage, we probably want to start planning to integrate your quantum technologies, you know, using the knowledge you've gained from the previous steps. I would say on that point, really 2 things. One is it's not likely to be plug and play. What do I mean by that? Well, if anybody's tried to integrate AI into their business in the past 2 years, you probably know what I'm talking about. But also, you know, coming back to the point about quantum computers not being able to do everything better, you don't want to send an entire problem set down to the quantum computer, right? You want to send the part of that problem set or the subroutine that's going to be most effectively addressed by a quantum computer. So when I say it's not going to be plug and play, it's going to be probably less plug and play than any other technology you've used, but also that the costs are highly dependent. So are you playing to win? Is quantum computing going to be, you know, really significant or critical to your business model in the future? And if you don't use it, you know that your competitors are. Then you're probably going to need a really kind of high qubit, absolute latest quantum computer. And the cost difference between that and if you just want to dabble, if you want to use a, you know, for lack of a better phrase, low qubit, kind of, you know, just experimental level proof of concepts, then there's orders of magnitude difference in cost. But that's about where I'm going to end today's conversation. I would just like to say thank you very much indeed for your time. Hopefully it's been useful for some people here. Everything I've said here in this presentation can be found in this quantum computing report, which is in the center. Also, I've done a quantum sensing one here on the right, and that chart I mentioned, which I think people seem to be quite fond of, where we look at 100 different areas of innovation, can be found in the report on the left. But otherwise, from me, thank you very much.